just wait a couple of minutes for everyone to get in, as usual. Brilliant, that looks like it. Great, fantastic. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Embercombe Online. We're back in business again after a couple of months off after the summer, so it's wonderful to see you. We've got free talks happening all over the autumn and winter, which we're announcing at the moment, so keep an eye on our website for those. We've also got some workshops with some of the speakers that we've had over the summer lockdown, so if you're interested, then please do come along to those too. So really just to say from me that the work of Embercombe really is looking at the overlap between humans and the land and the relationship between those two things. We look at the rewilding of the land in the work that we do on our 50-acre site, but we're also very interested in the rewilding of people. And it seems to me, and I think to a lot of us, that the kind of relationship between our ancestors and the land is a really important thing when we're talking about wilding, because in a way they lived perhaps arguably in a land that was much wilder than ours is today. So tonight we are talking to Andreas Kornevall, who is a mythologist and is going to talk to us about the old tradition of Europe and the British Isles, which he refers to as the Northern Tradition, and he will tell you more about that in a minute. What I'd just like to do before we start is a bit of housekeeping, which is to say just very simply that we'll talk for about 45 minutes, something like that, and then we'll be open at the end for live questions. So we'll be asking for you to put your hand up at the end there if you want to ask Andreas something. We'll also be taking questions in the chat as we go along. So yeah, if you have anything that you desperately need to ask, then please do put it in the chat. And either Nusha, who's hosting tonight, or I will pick it up, and hopefully we'll get to as many questions as we can. So Andreas, I will hand over to you. I just wanted everybody to know that you have a tortoise in the room there with you, which is something we were discussing just before we went live. Hopefully she isn't going to make too much of an interruption to what we need to say, but over to you, sir. I guess my first question for you really is, what is the Northern Tradition then, and how did you come about it?
Right, okay, here we are. It's good to be here. I really appreciate to have some time to talk about these things. I would say that the Northern Tradition, how I would see it, is linguistic. So if you speak English, you are most likely, you use the days of the week. So you are already invoking the pantheon by speaking in the language of that you speak. So Monday is the day of Mani, the day of the god of the moon. Tuesday is the day of Tiwaz. Wednesday is, of course, the day of Woden. Thursday is Thor's day. Friday is Frigga day. Now, Saturday is an interesting one. In some cultures, it's Saturday means washing, or relating to Saturn in some cases. But in Old English and Old Norse, it's relating to washing day. And then Sunday is the day of the sun. So the Northern Tradition is linguistic in a sense that its roots are Old Norse and Old English. So that's where we get, so all the cultures from Middle to Northern Europe, including the British Isles, are all part of this tradition. Another word for it is ancient custom, which I do prefer, or old custom, because it relates to the culture that was there before the Mediterranean influx of Rome and then later on Christianity. So it's, I would say the old custom is probably more appropriate word, but both of them relate to the same thing.
So I think you have a story about how you came to it, Andreas, which I don't know about. So can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's not a, the story happened, well, for me, I was someone like many of us are. I was a seeker, and I was always looking for that single expression. And polytheistic religions or thoughts, they never want to encase reality into a single expression. In fact, it's a bit of a taboo. They want to keep the abundant diversity going. I find that a lot of us are quite obsessed with always that single expression of divinity. It's something that's very much related now to the way we think. So it's difficult to see beyond monoculture and beyond the kind of the monotheism of the world. But anyway, so I was very much part of more of a non-dualistic thinking, and I found myself living in the Pyrenees, and it was around 2005 that the Pyrenean brown bear was shot, and it was the last one. Her name was Cannelle, it means cinnamon in French. And when the gun, I could hear it like almost like a soul tinnitus. I can still hear the gunshot. There was no reaction. So she had been killed after 90 million years of living in the Pyrenees. And I was desperate to find a reason for why there's absolutely no gesture towards this crime in terms of what the spiritual traditions I was studying or working with. No one gave me an answer to how I can deal with this tragedy. It was effectively a very strong sense I had, lots of anger. And so what happened was that I came upon the Eddas, and they're called the grandmothers. These are the old texts. And the answer was right in front of me. And the goddess of death, her name is Hela, she said, right there on the stanzas, she said, if you want this world to come alive, if you want to see the light and life to grow, you have to learn what it is like to weep. You have to learn to grieve properly. Everything has to learn to grieve, the stones, the clouds, the trees. And that's what happened in the world of the gods. They had to learn to grieve very, very deeply. And it was only after that all of that anger and all of this sheer frustration for what happened with this Pyrenean brown bear, that I learned that there was a wisdom tradition kind of lurking behind where I came from in my own tradition. So that's how I started. But it really began after that loss, and then I realized that was where my first steps was into this tradition.
Okay, so I know we're going to talk a little bit about grief later, but could we just go back to what this tradition is then? So you've alluded to the fact it's polytheistic. So I think probably most of us know the names of some of the gods that you mentioned earlier in the days of the week, and we have ideas that we know about Norse mythology. And can you give us in a nutshell really kind of just what the central belief of it is? Sorry, that's not a very easy question, but yes, in a nutshell, how would you kind of describe it?
So in its essence, it's something that is very orthopraxic, which means that it's something that you do. It's not something you believe in. Belief it's really not the big thing. It's whether you know the songs, is whether you know the language, or if it's whether you know the runes or the blessings or the ceremonies. So it's a doing tradition. It's also very intensely magical in its right reason, that you put your will into the practice. And I want to say one thing about language. In our English language, in all the northern languages, or the roots of the Old English and Old Norse, is that we cannot conjugate a verb into the future. So in French, you say mangerai, which means I will eat tomorrow. But in English, you have to put will before that. So you have to engage your will to say to someone whether I'm going to go to the pub with you tomorrow. I will go and have a beer with you. I will do this. Now, this is extremely important. It is the will that drives that. The culture that stands behind that means that it's very shamanistic in its origin, because it means that the future is not predetermined. It means that we have to find our own strength and our own will to make the future happen. And this is extremely important when you work with runes as well. So this tradition is orthopraxic, and it means that it's a doing. So it's not theoretical. It's not very academic. Yes, it can be, of course, with history, but it's a practical tradition. Now, what encompasses all of the practical? Well, it's handicrafts, it's witchcraft, of course, which is Seidr in the Old Norse language. But witchcraft is very important. We see remnants of the northern tradition in local witchcraft, like the Cornish witchcraft, Scottish witchcraft, and elsewhere. And also the ceremonies, how to conduct ceremonies and how to be in a community, how to live together. And how to share that community. That's really what encompasses the tradition. But we take sources. The sources that I use when I teach, they can be from the medieval times. They can be even the grimoire tradition in there, or they can be sources that are the myths that go back into the Eddas or go back into the 5th century and even further back. One good analogy is the knife. So in the Bronze Age, you have a knife with a horn handle and the bronze blade. But over generations, you might have changed the blade, changed the handle, and it moves from generation to generation. Now we still have the knife, so it's still the same knife, although it's gone through many, many changes over time. That's a good analogy of it.
So would you say that there are ceremonies and prayers and rituals today that do go back into antiquity? We always ask about this kind of, is it an unbroken tradition? And that's not a fair question, but there is a body of knowledge and practice that does go back then.
Yes, and the one thing we do have very much saved in our literary sources, because we live in a world for some reason that everything has to be written in order for it to be what's the word I'm looking for? If it's not written, it's not quite real. The written word has such an infectious thing. We have to see it on the paper before we can believe it, right? But what we do have is that we have the ceremonies are written in the sagas and they are written in the Edda. So we do have a very distinct form that we can still practice if you're looking for that unbrokenness. But at the same time, because it's a doing tradition, it relates very much to the modern times we live in. So we don't want to touch the tombs and sort of create what's called a reenactment. It's not reenactment at all. It's because the myths themselves never were, they always are. It's a famous quote from a Roman, I think he was Salicius, his name was. Myths never were, they always are. So when the myths come to us, they speak directly to our present time. And that's what we're working with. We're working with material that speak directly of our lives today. So it's not a history lesson we're taking, although history comes into it, but it's very, very geared towards the present.
Fantastic. Before we go to the present time then, because I know that that's really what we want to focus on now, could you just tell us what the Eddas are then, just for people here that don't know?
The Eddas are, they're animal skins. They're written animal skins, and they have the old poets' poetry in them. But what defines the Edda, the Poetic Edda, is that she has no author, okay? And that defines myth in its larger scope. If you want to know what a myth is, a great writer to look up is someone called Sean Keane. I will give you the book list later on, but his definition of a myth is that it has no author. It comes from somewhere else. And the Eddas have poetry in it, which is extremely eldritch. It's very mysterious. And in them, they were hidden from about 12th century up to 17th century. They were hidden in Iceland. We only think we know that. Why would they be hidden? It's because they had to survive the medieval period. There's no way a bishop or the church would have got their hands on the Edda, the scripts, they would have burnt them very, very quickly. So the Eddas were hidden for 500 years. And it's a great story because when they were found by a bishop, and he gave, this bishop gave the Eddas to the King of Denmark in 1640. And then in 1973, the King of Denmark decided to bring the Eddas back to Reykjavik. But they couldn't figure out how to do it because it was too risky to put them on a plane. So they were so precious that they weren't allowed to put them on a plane. So they had to have warships, and all the different pages of animal skins went to Reykjavik, and that's where they are now. But they are the very precious sources of what we can call a heathen Europe or a pagan Europe that we have written from that time. So.
Oh, wow, wow. So, Andreas.
Yes.
Relevance to the present time then. Actually, before we talk about that, can we talk about the British Isles then? Were these practices in this, well, it's not in this country, we're from all different countries, but in the British Isles?
Yeah, so if you are,
this is where we both are at this moment.
If you're interested in Celtic traditions, Celtic culture, you need to learn a Celtic language. This is a very absolutely indispensable thing. Language is a form of an organ of perception. So if you are speaking English, your roots come from what we call the Anglo-Saxon roots, and then also the Old English and the Old Norse. So anyone who speaks this language have an inherent interest in understanding what it stands behind the words and what are the stories that stands behind the roots of this language. So I've been lucky in my life because I'm trilingual, so I have linguistic energy, a current in me. So I speak Swedish and English. So I have in a way, a privileged position to work in these two things. But absolutely, an English spoken, if you are speaking English, this is a tradition that's it's a bit like saying, if you come from beyond the Indus Valley, you are Hindu. You can't escape that. It's something that's in your bones, and so that's why it's relevant to these islands. But we don't know much in terms of the migration periods. Of course, history tells us nothing before Caesar came here with his Roman legions. We have very little understanding of migration before the Roman time. But certainly in the 5th, 6th century, 5th century, there was a lot of migration back and forth between the sort of continental European cultures coming in, and today that's the language that we have. So yeah, it's very relevant. In fact, place names you have all over the UK. You've got thousands of place names for the old gods. And England itself, now the word England comes from a rune called Ingwaz, or a god called Ing. And Ing was a fertility god. He was a god of love. His sort of big symbol is the Great Erection. And that's what you see in the maypole traditions in Scandinavia. When you dance around the maypole, it's very much Frey's fertility. It's his sort of lingam, as they say in India. And England comes from that word. So we are part of the god of Frey. So England is part of Lord Frey, as we call him. And the Angles that came in, they also worshipped Frey in history. So to be English is to be part of the god of love, Frey.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, well, relevance today, Andreas, that's where we were going. Why do you think it's important that we revisit these old gods?
Well, firstly, we have the old laws in the Eddas and in the myths, and the old laws are called urlog, primal laws. And the primal laws tell us that climate change happened, and the way in which we created our world was that we harnessed the bull to plow the field. And the gods did exactly the same thing to the giants. They harnessed the giants to create the universe. Now, these laws are extremely important to learn because what happens is we understand why we're in the position that we're in. The moment we harness the wild, the Eddas will say this, the moment we harness the wild, we are in debt. We are in debt, and that debt has to be paid back. And the giants know this, and all the, in the cosmology of the Eddas, this is one of the primal laws. So the moment we're in now is that we have tamed the wild to such a degree that it's starting to ask for the payment back. It's and what we are seeing is that the interesting thing in the myths, of course, is that the sky was made by killing one of the main giants called Ymir, and it's his skull that holds up the sky. So all the time when we look at the weather patterns, we are constantly thinking, what is Ymir? What is he doing? What's he thinking? And when Odin, or Wodan in this country, Odin in Scandinavia, when he took down Ymir and harnessed him, we did exactly the same thing to the bull. We did exactly the same thing to the animals. So we are living always very much in kinship with the gods. They have made the same mistakes as we have made, and there is a relationship that we have towards them, and we fight the same battles. So they are also facing climate change. They're also facing this trouble, and they're also trying to find a way out. So so that's how it's relating to today's world, and also, of course, the idea that grief is central to understanding our predicament. If we don't have grief, we are not able to understand what is moving towards us. So the goddess of death, Hela, she gives us also these primal laws that tells us that we have to, we have to understand what the losses are, and that's how we can turn things around. So yeah, it's big work.
Okay, so are you able to touch into that work at all? So we're in this predicament.
So the main, so the main work is the work of reconciliation, and we see one of the other urlogs, primal laws, is that what the gods did is they had to have a reconciliation between the earth spirits and the sky gods. It's called the Asir and the Vanir, and they reconciled together. They fought first, and this battle we see again in our world. It's the indigenous versus the sky. It's the earth and heaven, and the reconciliation hasn't happened yet in Middle Earth in our world. It is the longing. The gods have done the reconciliation, and it's their guidance that it happens here. And what that reconciliation looks like, it's basically to face for the sky, for the earth spirit, for the indigenous, to face the sky gods, and to come together and to be reconciled. Now, this can only happen if you bring out the Grail. Now, the Grail, in a funny way, because we live in a Christian tradition, the Grail was something that was very well known in the Northern tradition, way before the Grail stories. And the Grail, what it is the opportunity that we spit and weep into a vat. And when we do that together, the waters from our tears and our spit creates the crown of creation. It creates what we all long for. It's called wisdom. And wisdom comes from this reconciliation. And without it, there can be no wisdom in the earth, in the world here where we live in. But this happened in the world of the gods. So we know it can happen also to us. But this work, how to do that, requires, a big navigation. The Catholic Church versus the Chinese versus the Tibetans, the heaven and earth, that's not going to shift very easy, but that's the work.
Good. So okay, do you have an idea of, or is there any guidance for us on how to go about that then? Is there?
Yeah, so my work is obviously to reenact that ritual, that ceremony, and we're going to look at that when we meet on the 10th of October. And it's a ceremony you can do for months and months on end. It's a big ceremony, or you can do it quicker, but it's something a bit like a concertina. You can draw it out for long periods of time. But this ceremony is something that is desperately needed. But you need to learn. First of all, we need to learn from where the creation myth. So what I need to talk about on the 10th, of course, is the creation myth. So we can understand how these laws are laid down, such as when the gods and the giants were fighting, and also the laws of reconciliation, and that's in the text. So we will go through that, and we will find out how beautiful and how amazing a ritual we can make. It's only our imagination that is the limiting factor. So it's unlimited. We can really work on this reconciliation. The main thing is that there are two opposing forces that can stand together and are prepared to reconcile. So these reconciliation rituals probably need to happen in places which have seen a lot of conflict, which have seen a lot of distress. So that's the Life Cairn, which is a memorial for extinct species, is a form of reconciliation to the extinction crisis. It is a way in which hunters and which all people who've created the situation we're in can come and make peace at what's happened. So that's a form of reconciliation ritual.
It feels like there are so many different reconciliations that kind of hang in the air between us all, you know, so many wounds of the past and so many expressions of reconciliation. And maybe we're kind of almost in the age of reconciliation. I really like that idea of that is kind of like the way forward for us.
Yes.
I don't know if everybody knows, but Andreas is doing a workshop with us on the 10th of October when we are going to go into this in a lot more depth. So really this is kind of a very quick run through some of this material just to give you a taste of it. So yeah, if you want to know more, then do come then. I'd love to know more about the reconciliation ceremony that you're talking about, Andreas, but I'm guessing that's something for then, is it? Or can you say any more about that? Or?
Yeah, the reconciliation has to also happen on an individual basis. That's relating to the dragon. So
right.
the dragon, in a way, the dragon path is a reconciliation between what we can call the difficult parts of you and the great parts of you that come together. So to be a rune reader, to be dealing with the runic current, you know, you've had to go through very difficult parts in your life, and you've had to be able to reconcile those. And those are usually what we call the elders. So to gain a very quick alchemical image is that the difficult parts of us, which are usually unbidden, we don't choose them. They happen to us one day, you know, we're there, it's happening to us. And that's called the soul, where you need to shed a lot of skin and you go underground, you go into the dark. Now, and we call that the soul. A lot of psychologists have followed through with this. James Hillman is one of them, who always speak of the underworld journey as the soul being tempered and being worked on. Now, the spirit is usually in the expression of the golden eagle. It's the eagle that everyone wants to be. It's the big wings flying towards the sun. And usually when we are young and youthful, we only want the eagle. All of us really just don't really want to deal with the serpent. But in life, you don't have much of a choice, you know, because tough times will come. And when they do, you need to learn how to reconcile the serpent and the eagle. And if you can, you create what's called the dragon body. You create the dragon scales that enables you to fly up to the world tree, up high, and also go low beneath. But that is very much a maturing aspect to spirit and to soul. It's something that happens usually a little bit later on in life, but that's a big step. And the runes guide us on how that reconciliation happens within us.
Can you say a little bit about the runes, Andreas? You said a few sentences ago about rune readers, and that just made me think, wow.
So, the runes are, first of all, they're a heritage. Well, they form the alphabet of Old Norse. So it's called the younger Futag, is the alphabet of the Old Norse. The older Futag is the other alphabet, is an alphabet of an extinct language, Proto-Germanic. But what I will say quickly is that the runes also have very much an art heritage behind them. And they are usually painted on the back of dragons when they are made. So if you look at a rune stone in Scandinavia, you will see there's a dragon carved onto the rune stone with runes around its body. So the runes in themselves can be used as signs to write with. But what we are going to study is this idea that they are symbols, that they are ideograms, which means that they have an image behind them. They have, they're a little bit like, they have something which is more akin to a tarot card. Yeah, but they're much older than the tarot card system, but they have this, so we can look into the symbolism and see if that symbolism can help us. And that's what I will show, is that that symbolism of the runes is aligned to this reconciliation of finding ourselves and reconciling in ourselves. It's in a way, it's like a path, and it's called the serpent path and the eagle path. It's two of them that we merge. But runes have a big history. There's a lot of there's plenty of time to go through them. But I would say for now that they are ideograms, which means that they are a sign that has a symbol behind, that has an image behind it. So we're going to find out what that is.
And could you recommend anything for people to read around that in advance, or is that something that you'll be?
Yes, I will send. I will definitely send a book list. There's an endless book list on all of this, so I will send that across for those of you who sign up. That you will receive that beforehand. Now, the idea of the serpent road and the soul and the spirit, of course, exist in all the folk tales. So we are going to look at folk tales, and we're going to learn that in the folk tale you have this constant alchemical process of what we can call individuation, or finding out who we are and what our gift is to the world and what we can offer to the world. And you will see that in that we will read the folk tales. The folk tales we're going to tackle on the 10th, it's going to be Mother Holly, which is the old name for Hela, the goddess of the underworld. And in this particular story, we're going to discuss the relationship between mothers and daughters. And that folk tale expresses then how this relationship is through the ages. So it'll be a great investigation.
Fantastic. I'm utterly fascinated by the dragon. So we've called this talk and your workshop Waking the Dragon. And I'm just thinking of all the reverberations of dragon lines and dragon energy and earth energy. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about it. So it's obviously the symbol of this alchemical fusion.
Yeah. So
tell us more about dragons.
Yeah, so the idea then is that the serpent and the golden eagle, when they merge, the dragon is born. But it has to happen either as a community or in ourselves. Now you can, if you look at, for example, America today, everyone's obsessed with the eagle. You can, it's on top of the flag. Everyone's obsessed with that kind of the big flight to the sun. Now, dragon is this combination, and the best way of doing it is to look at the labyrinths. So the labyrinth are these serpent shapes that we've had in history. And I work a lot with labyrinths, and we use the road of soul, of shedding your skin. We walk into a labyrinth. And whilst we do that, we reenact the difficult parts of our lives, and we learn from it. And that's called that's kind of the dragon path. So dragons they don't give much gratification. They're difficult things to work with. But what they have innately in them is a great sense of fertility. So they used to be living deep in the wells. So dragons were those that lived deep in the earth, and they produced all this life-giving water. That's where that came into the land. So the image of a dragon probably is an image of the old gods. but it became the St. George image when someone killed the dragon with the spear, and that tends to be the conquest of Christianity. It's the image of Christianity conquering the pagan world. So that's not really the rightful image of the dragon. The dragon is an older and probably a very much a divine part of our history, probably an expression of the old gods.
Okay, Chris here is asking about your mention of James Hillman. You know, yes. Obviously, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so James Hillman is, I think he's drawn a lot of, he gives a lot of insight into the soul journey and what that looks like. So he can actually, he's a great one to read when you are on, you know, when we're going down the serpent path, when we're going into the soul journey, how to shed our skins, how to get through obstacles. We are very much in the soul path right now in society. So so he's a great one to read, and especially on alchemy. He's a master on alchemy. He's a psychologist, by the way, for anyone who didn't know who he is. He's a psychologist. He's not alive anymore, but that's his.
Brilliant. There you go, Chris. So I'm gonna open it to questions in a minute, Andreas, but I'm just, before we do that, and also for the people who might not be coming on the 10th of October, I was wondering if you could say anything about, and this is always a difficult question really, but what can we take, or what can people take now to kind of embody some of this in their lives? I mean, it just feels like we're at this moment, you know, when some of these myths and systems are kind of emerging as important to people. Is there anything that you'd recommend?
Well, the oldest religion in the world, you know, the oldest yoga in the world is to go to a place and start to feed. Find a place that you know, find the anima loci, the local spirit. And you know, many of us don't know the name of the local spirit anymore. We've lost that. So find out what spirit lived locally to you. Figure out the name. Maybe even learn the Old English, its name in Old English, or its name even before that, and speak it out loud. Find a place, maybe by a river, or you can be in the city. That's absolutely fine, but a place that speaks to you, and then feed it with something. Feeding meaning that you give it offering, you give it a libation, you can give it some words, you can also give it a gift, and see how your relation starts to build. And do this for 6 months, or do this for 1 year, and see what your relation ends up being to that place. And also find out whether you get, if you speak out loud, that's, I would say, if you can, learn to speak out loud when you're in that place, and then listen to see if you hear an echo coming back, you know, some language. Maybe it can be a rustling of the leaves, or it can be some strange sound that comes back to you. But start that relationship and see what happens. That is the oldest yoga we have. That's what we've done since the beginning of time. And be grateful for your time that's been given to you. So go and give an offering, give a libation, say some things, and start that relationship. But especially if you've learned the name of the local spirit, don't be afraid if it's a monster or something that you see in the folk tales. You know, go into it and face that, and see what you know, even learn if there are stories behind that local spirit. Now, the local spirit, we call it tomte, and we always have to feed it porridge during the solstices. So this is the Scandinavian tradition that happens still today. But in England, it will be the same. And it's a bit of effort, but it can be done. That's the first thing I would do, and see what happens to you after doing that for 4 to 6 months. See what your relationship will be.
And when you say find the local spirit, you mean find it for yourself, do you? Or is there?
Yeah, figure out. Look in the old stories. There was a dragon not far from where I live here in Sussex. There was a dragon that destroyed Chichester in 1524. And supposedly a new one's going to come. They come every 500 years. So there's a new one due on 2024. But there are so many stories and little and creatures that you can start to see what that local spirit is. But don't, you know, go in there with a listening ear and see what happens and be open to it. And that's probably the most basic kind of heathen custom that we have.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, Trudy's just asked the same question that I meant there. So yeah, I think that answered that. Okay, does anybody have any questions? I'm just going to put gallery view on. You can either put them in the chat or wave.
Are we invited to the dragon in 2024?
Yeah.
So we can approach this psychologically, or we can approach it spiritually. In the beginning, it tends to be psychological, that it's something that might come to us psychologically in 2024, right? I tend to work with both these ideas. So I psychologize this work as well as looking at the spiritual side of it. So I would reckon that 2024 would be a very interesting year if the dragon appears, and it could be a year of reconciliation. It could be a year where we are coming to our senses. I would like to see more dragons and people who have the dragon sense than we do now. There's a temptation to follow the eagle, and it's always there. But it's a beautiful thing. I've done it myself. But we need to be able to, it's the Icarus story. I guess we all have heard of what happens when Icarus flies to the sun with his wings. That's what we call sometimes that there isn't the serpent there to bring him down to earth again.
So how would you spot dragon people then, people that carry the dragon energy? What's the kind of characteristics or the...
Well, look, I would say that someone who probably has a bit of wisdom highlights in the hair, someone who's seen a few scars, maybe has a limp, easily weeps, has great sense of humbleness, never arrogant. I mean, in Asia, you will say the dragon power is self-mastery. That's what you would say in Asia, which is a very similar thing, really.
Here's a great question. How can we connect more with the serpent then, do you think, to bring the dragon forward?
One thing I love is work by someone called, her name is Gemma Gary. I think she works with Cornish witchcraft. She's a very interesting lady. I come across her recently, and she creates these serpent paths where she goes to find medicine or herbs to work with, and she does it through the land. So she walks these very serpentine paths, and she there's a name for them. I think there is an old Cornish name for witches when they used to walk on the earth and collect the things they needed to do their magic. And I think it's a wonderful thing is when you go to your special place to find the anima loci, also pay attention to what you are passing through and make that into a bit of a serpent track. You can call it a serpent track, and enjoy that and learn and enjoy and walk that path over and over again and learn more and more about it. But the thing with the serpent power and what frightens people, and rightly so, is that it usually comes unbidden. It's the difficult parts of your life. It's the losses of your life. It's the betrayals, it's the divorces, it's all the things we don't want. So, you know, the serpent's not something we actively seek because it will happen to us. It's those things that life, unfortunately, gives us. But the runes can help us to understand how to walk through that. And that's what we're going to do on the 10th. We're going to learn what the runes are saying of how to go through grief, particularly how to go through loss and difficult times, depression, and all of that. So yeah, it's not something we want to kind of put on ourselves. It will come.
Okay. Okay, so I've got some more questions here. First of all, let's have a look. What can the old gods teach us about how to heal the earth, tackle climate change? I'm guessing it's what we talked about earlier, the reconciliation work, isn't it?
Yeah. So they can,
do you have any more to say on that?
Yeah, they can teach us that. But the gods they come to the dining table to feast with us as kin. So the difference here between the Northern tradition and the Mediterranean one is huge. Bending of knees and the kind of worship that we see from the Mediterranean cultures is it's not something you see much in the Northern tradition. It's more of a feasting. So you are sharing the troubles with the gods. It's like meeting uncles and aunts, troubled uncles and aunts. So the gods can teach us. Odin himself, he had to go through the serpent paths. So he had to go through the difficult paths to gain his wings. And one thing that the gods always, the stories insist, is that you need to find the water of life. So they will ask you to go out there and find what it is that inspires you, what it is that makes you want to jump up and live, what it is that wants to get up in the morning. That's the water of life, and they want you to sip deeply into that cup. So the access to the water of life is something that we do, and we look at how to get to the water of life. But to get to the water of life, we have to enter an emotional zone. So again, it's not something we can devour and just take for ourselves. We have to, again, go through some difficult things in order to get the water of life. But all of us have, in a way, the ability to drink deep from the water, from the mead of poetry, to get inspiration for this sometimes very, this human project. It's not an easy thing, this life. So we all, they teach us how to, the stories teach us how to find this water of life.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Here's one from Jen, who's on the coach right now to Cornwall. Can you recommend any sites that she should visit, particular kind of dragon?
In Cornwall?
Cornwall, yeah.
Well, I would say look at Gemma Barry. She's the one who will know all the sites. No, I'm not. I love Cornwall. I love Tintagel and all of the areas around there. But I don't have the stone circles up in where they are. But to visit those places is in a way a way in which you can start to do what we call finding that spirit and learning about it. But where you live now is probably where the work has to happen. So going to places like flying to South America to find things. Yes, it has its advantages, but it's important now that we try and look for this local spirit where we live and give them a name, give them some aesthetic, give them some strength again, bring them back. We want to bring them back. They're all mischievous. Around Sussex, they're all goblins.
Fantastic. Which Celtic language is the best language to speak to them in? Then this has come up a couple of times in the chat.
There's the person who really can help you with that is wonderful musician Carolyn Hillier.
Oh yes,
she's the one. She has done a lot of work with Proto-Celtic language, which is, I think, her work. And when she speaks it, it sends chills down my spine hearing it. It's a wonderful thing to hear. So she's the one to look up for that. Of course, we've got all the Celtic languages, Gaelic and Ireland and places like the Cornish languages, and find out if, for me, it's not so much about learning it fluently. It's just learning some phrases in the beginning and being able to have it on your tongue, to speak it out loud. Just a couple of stanzas.
I've got also to tell you, Nusha has reminded me that we've got, Carolyn Hillier and her partner Nigel are doing a concert at Embercombe later on this year, but also Carolyn will be doing one of these talks at some point during the autumn. So we'll let you know about that. and she's fantastic. I'm just going to read this because I don't have time to digest it. If we lived on colonized land, what are your thoughts on spirit and culture versus connecting with your own ancestral spirits, even if their origin is far away? I think this is a question that a lot of us have, having kind of moved around.
There's such a wound there. And it's so much hurt there, that reconciliation there is extremely important. And but this kind of open wound, very courageously you have to grapple with it and learn from the land, and be in, I would say, almost in to get a teacher from someone who knows the land. It doesn't have to be someone that's lived for generations and generations, but someone who has maybe farmed the land, worked with the land, or hunted there, grown crops there, who have these wisdoms. But for the indigenous tribes in North America and South America, this is where we have the old battle between the sky gods and the earth spirits. And because there hasn't been a reconciliation, local spirits are not going to be easily accessed. And I'm afraid it's a big work. It's big serpent work. And Lord have mercy. I mean, we also have the same wound in Europe, so all of this is something we need to tackle. But no, it's not easy. It's not an easy question. Not an easy practice. But I think if you can find someone to guide you who lives there and have lived there for generations, that's a really good start. And start with the small things, just appreciating some of the rivers there and being able to speak to them in a language that they understand. But you are in a land of other caretakers and other guardians, spirits that I don't know about.
And here's a related question, and Holin, I'll come to you in a minute because I know that you've got your hand up, but here's a question. If we're called to move, particularly people with mixed heritage, what's the best way to find our new home?
Yeah, we are all we're all mixed. Everyone's migration is the path of humanity, isn't it? So I think the spiritual home will come when you have a sense of humbleness and a sort of when you're finding that you are not going from flower to flower. Spiritual homes tends to be when we take a root and we say, look, I'm gonna stay here now, and I'm gonna have a relationship with it. So the thing of leaving offerings and libations and creating a relationship with the area, that's taking root. But the problem is, if we have a little sap root and then we leave again to go to somewhere else, then our roots tend to be that we tend to almost go from flower to flower. So it is a bit of a problem with our modern way of living, that our relationship tends to be quite frayed.
Brilliant, thank you. Is it Holly or Holin there? Have you got your hand up? Would you like to actually ask your question? Nisha, can you unmute?
But I have to say also, I myself, I've lived in South America, I've lived all over the place. So I'm not, I have myself suffered this kind of thing where relationships, sometimes you don't have the time to really root down. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi.
I know that. Hi.
Gosh, I have so many questions and I really look forward to your longer workshop. My question was, I have so many, but one of them was, do you think that dragon people need to come together, or do they naturally come together to do the work that's needed right now? Because I find that that's happening to me, and it has over the past year or so, and it's just been continually unfolding, and I'm just embracing the mystery in it all. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
I love the way dragon people has become a word now from this evening. Dragon people. Okay, so what the very funny thing is that the person that's a dragon in your life is probably your grandmother. It's probably your grandfather. It's probably someone or an ancestor you haven't thought about for a long time. So we have to again remember that to cross the road and to give a birthday card to a grandmother can be more difficult than flying to Bali for a kirtan session. Okay, so you have to, I think we have to also recognize that the families where we live in, with all the troubles that they have, that's where we need to start from. But it's so difficult. We'd rather go off somewhere else, but that's where we need to start from. So I would say that probably the dragon in your life will be a grandparent, and to nurture them and to give them the respect and the love would be a great way of also awakening your own dragon powers, awakening your dragon, so to speak.
Wow, fantastic. I think that's probably going to be a good place to end, Andreas. We've got a great question from Michael about ethnobotany, but it feels like it's probably too late to go into that. Maybe you could cover that a little bit in the workshop.
Oh yes, now ethnobotany is we're going to cover that on the 10th, because the Mead of Poetry is full of herbal stories and what the Mead of Poetry contains and all of these things. So we're going to cover that, especially the troublesome teachers from all these herbs. The northern tradition is the flyagaric mushroom, which is in some cases also they think is the same as the soma in India, in the same mythology. But there's a lot of conversation there, much too much to have tonight. But yeah, we're definitely going to cover that in our on the 10th. I will take probably a little time apart, because working with herbs and working with nature, within one horn, to drink one ale before the 17th century, even in Germany, there will be about 500 or 600 herbs or plants in the drink, fermenting. It was forbidden after the 17th century. The only drink these days that have the same tradition or the same ingredient, it's called Jägermeister. They're the only one. They're the only ones who are allowed to have this. Another plant was the henbane, which is a dangerous plant, but it used to be used a lot. But it's something that you have to work with. You need to know exactly what you're doing. So all of the herbs that you have to show great respect for, because any missteps can be quite dangerous. So that's the idea of witchcraft, and that's Seidr. Seidr is all of these ideas of how to work with these ancient herbs, and we're going to definitely cover that. It's a big part of this of the course.
Wow. Well, I'm going to try and be there. Andreas, it feels like we've grilled you from all kinds of different directions tonight, and you've been really game for answering. And thank you so much, and thank you to you all for coming. I hope to see you again. Andreas, did you want to say a little something to see us out? We've got a few minutes to go.
I'll say a traditional prayer to get you going. And you can, when I say this prayer, you can actually follow it in your head. And it comes from the Poetic Edda. So it's straight from the old myths. And the prayer goes like this. Hail the day, hail the sons of day, hail the night and her sisters. Look upon us here with friendly eyes and give us victory. Hail the gods, hail the goddesses, and hail this fertile earth. Give us wisdom, eloquent speech, and healing hands for as long as we live.